The night was cold, and the streets were empty. A young girl, barely in her 20s, walked home after her late shift at the diner. Her name was Lena, though no one in the neighborhood knew much about her. She was quiet, always keeping to herself, but her eyes carried a warmth that made people trust her instantly. Tonight, her mind was preoccupied with thoughts of her sick mother and the mounting medical bills. She quickened her pace, her breath visible in the chilly air. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the silence. Lena froze, her heart pounding. A sleek black car had veered off the road and slammed into a tree just a few feet away. Without thinking, she sprinted toward the wreckage. The car was mangled, smoke rising from the hood. Inside, a man in an expensive suit was slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling down his forehead. Lena's hands trembled as she tried to open the door, but it was jammed. She grabbed a rock from the roadside and smashed the window, ignoring the shards of glass that cut her palms. "Sir! Can you hear me?" she shouted, shaking the man gently. He groaned but didn't wake up. Lena unbuckled his seatbelt and dragged him out of the car, her small frame straining under his weight. She laid him on the grass and checked his pulse. It was weak but steady. As she caught her breath, something caught her eye. Inside the car, wedged under the dashboard, was a small, glowing device. It looked like nothing she had ever seen before, a sleek, metallic object with strange symbols etched into its surface. Before she could get a closer look, the man stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Who are you?" he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "I'm Lena. You were in an accident. I pulled you out," she said, kneeling beside him. He stared at her, his gaze sharp despite his injuries. "Did you see anything?" Lena hesitated. "Just the car. It's pretty banged up." The man nodded slowly, but his eyes darted toward the car, lingering on the glowing device. Before he could say more, the sound of sirens filled the air. An ambulance and a police car pulled up, their lights flashing brightly. Paramedics rushed to the scene, taking the man away on a stretcher. Lena stood back, watching as they loaded him into the ambulance. One of the paramedics turned to her. "You saved his life," he said. "If you hadn't pulled him out, he might not have made it." Lena nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake the image of that strange device. What was it? And why did the man seem so nervous when he asked if she had seen it? As the ambulance drove away, Lena glanced back at the wrecked car. The device was gone. The hospital room was quiet, save for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. The man from the car accident lay in bed, his head bandaged and his face pale. His name was Victor Kane, a name that carried weight in the city. He was a self-made millionaire, known for his tech empire and philanthropic work. But behind the public image was a man with secrets he had almost lost in that car crash. Victor's mind raced as he stared at the ceiling. The accident had been too close for comfort. If that girl hadn't been there. He shuddered at the thought. But there was something else bothering him. Had she seen the device? He couldn't take any chances. The door creaked open, and a nurse walked in, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Kane, you have a visitor," she said with a smile. Victor frowned. "I didn't authorize any visitors." Before the nurse could respond, a young woman stepped into the room. It was Lena. She looked nervous, clutching the strap of her worn-out bag. I just wanted to check on you," she said softly. "I hope it's okay." Victor studied her for a moment, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. She was ordinary, plain clothes, no makeup, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. But there was something about her, something he couldn't quite place. "Come in," he said finally, gesturing to the chair beside his bed. Lena sat down, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "How are you feeling?" "Alive, thanks to you," Victor replied, his tone polite but guarded. I owe you my life. Lena shook her head. I just did what anyone would have done. Victor smiled faintly. Not many people would risk their lives for a stranger. There was a pause, the air thick with unspoken questions. Lena glanced at him, her curiosity getting the better of her. That device in your car. What is it? Victor's smile faded. He had hoped she hadn't noticed it, but now there was no avoiding the truth. It's a prototype, he said carefully. Something my company is working on. It's still in the early stages, so I'd appreciate it if you kept it confidential. Lena nodded, though her eyes betrayed her skepticism. It looked advanced. Like nothing I've ever seen before. Victor leaned back against the pillows, his expression unreadable. It's a project close to my heart. If it works, it could change the world. Lena wanted to ask more, but something in his tone stopped her. There was a finality to his words, a warning not to pry further. She stood up, forcing a smile. I should let you rest. I'm glad you're okay. Victor reached out, his hand brushing hers. Wait. I'd like to repay you for what you did. How about a job at my company? It's the least I can do. Lena hesitated. A job at Kane Industries? It was an offer most people would jump at, but something about Victor made her uneasy. Still, the thought of steady income and benefits for her family was tempting. I'll think about it, she said finally. Lena shook her head, unable to put her feelings into words. I need to think about it. That night, as she lay in bed, Lena stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. The offer was tempting, but the memory of Victor's guarded expression and the mysterious device haunted her. She thought about her family, about the sacrifices they had made to keep going. Could she really turn down an opportunity like this? The next morning, as she got ready for work, her mother called her into the bedroom. Lena, her mother said softly, I heard you talking to Raj last night. About the job offer. Lena sighed, sitting down beside her. I'm still thinking about it, Ma. I don't know if it's the right thing to do. Her mother reached out, her hand trembling as she touched Lena's cheek. You've always put us first, Beta. But you can't keep sacrificing your own happiness for us. If this job could give you a better life, you should take it. Lena's eyes filled with tears. But what if it's not what it seems? What if I'm walking into something dangerous? Her mother smiled gently. You've always had a good heart, Lena. Trust your instincts. But don't let fear hold you back. Lena nodded, her resolve hardening. She would take the job, but she would keep her eyes open. Whatever Victor Kane was hiding, she would find out the truth. Victor nodded, his smile returning. Take your time. And Lena, thank you. As she left the room, Victor's smile faded. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. I need you to run a background check on someone, he said quietly. Her name is Lena. She was at the accident site. I need to know everything about her. Lena stepped out of the hospital, the cool night air hitting her face. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Victor Kane's offer replayed in her head, but so did the image of that strange device. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than he was letting on. She walked home, her feet dragging with exhaustion. Her small apartment was on the other side of town, in a neighborhood where the streets were lined with cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights. When she finally reached her building, she climbed the stairs to the third floor, her legs aching with every step. Inside, the apartment was dimly lit. Her younger brother, Raj, was sitting at the kitchen table, his schoolbook spread out in front of him. He looked up when she walked in, his face lighting up with relief. You're late, he said, his voice tinged with worry. I was starting to get scared. Lena forced a smile, ruffling his hair. I'm fine, Raj. just got caught up with something." Her mother's voice came from the other room, weak but warm. "Lena? Is that you?" "Yes, Ma," Lena called back, walking into the small bedroom where her mother lay. The room smelled of medicine and antiseptic, a constant reminder of her mother's failing health. Her mother smiled up at her, her face pale but kind. "How was work, Beta?" Lena sat on the edge of the bed, taking her mother's hand. "It was okay. Just the usual." She didn't mention the accident or Victor Kane. Her mother had enough to worry about without adding to her stress. But as she looked at her mother's frail frame, the weight of their struggles pressed down on her. The medical bills were piling up, and her meager income from the diner wasn't enough to cover them. Back in the kitchen, Raj was still studying, his brow furrowed in concentration. Lena sat down across from him, her mind racing. "Raj," she said hesitantly, "what would you think if I got a new job?" Raj looked up, his eyes wide with curiosity. "A new job? Where?" Lena hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. "At Kane Industries. The man I helped tonight, he's the owner. He offered me a job as a way to thank me." Raj's face lit up. "That's amazing. You'd make so much more money there. And maybe we could finally—" He stopped himself, but Lena knew what he was thinking. Maybe they could finally afford better treatment for their mother. Maybe they could move to a nicer place. Maybe they wouldn't have to worry about money anymore. But Lena's unease lingered. "I don't know, Raj. Something about him, it doesn't feel right." Raj frowned. "What do you mean?" Lena stood outside the towering glass building of Kane Industries, her heart pounding. The sleek, modern structure loomed over her, a stark contrast to the small, run-down diner where she had worked for years. She adjusted the collar of her new blouse, a gift from Victor's assistant, and took a deep breath before walking inside. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile. "You must be Lena. Mr. Kane is expecting you. I'll take you to his office." Lena followed her through the maze of hallways, her eyes wide as she took in the bustling office. Employees in sharp suits hurried past, their conversations filled with words she didn't understand. She felt out of place, like a small fish in a vast ocean. When they reached Victor's office, the receptionist knocked lightly on the door before opening it. "Mr. Kane, Lena is here." Victor looked up from his desk, his sharp eyes lighting up with a smile. "Lena, welcome. I'm glad you decided to join us." Lena stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Kane." "Please, call me Victor," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I wanted to personally welcome you and explain your role here." Lena sat down, her nerves easing slightly. "What will I be doing?" Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You'll be working closely with me on a special project. It's highly confidential, but given your quick thinking and bravery, I believe you're the perfect fit." Lena's curiosity piqued. "What kind of project?" Victor hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "It's a device that can predict and prevent accidents. The one you saw in my car is an early prototype. With your help, we can refine it and save countless lives." Lena's eyes widened. "That sounds incredible. But how does it work?" Victor smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's complicated, but I'll walk you through everything. For now, let's get you settled in." He pressed a button on his desk, and a moment later, a man in a lab coat entered the room. "This is Dr. Arjun, one of our lead scientists. He'll show you to the lab and get you started." Lena stood up, shaking Dr. Arjun's hand. He was older, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lena. Follow me." As they walked to the lab, Dr. Arjun explained the basics of the project. The device you saw is called the temporal predictor. It uses advanced algorithms to analyze data and predict potential accidents before they happen. Lena frowned. But how does it predict the future? Dr. Arjun chuckled. It's not exactly predicting the future. It's more like calculating probabilities based on patterns. But the technology is groundbreaking, and we're still learning its full potential. When they reached the lab, Lena's breath caught in her throat. The room was filled with high-tech equipment, screens displaying complex data, and in the center of it all was the device she had seen in Victor's car. It glowed faintly, its surface covered in intricate symbols. Dr. Arjun handed her a tablet. This will be your workstation. You'll help us analyze the data and identify any anomalies. Lena nodded, her excitement growing. For the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. But as she sat down and began working, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the device than they were telling her. Over the next few days, Lena threw herself into her work. She learned quickly, her sharp mind grasping the complex concepts with ease. But as she delved deeper into the data, she began to notice inconsistencies, patterns that didn't make sense, anomalies that defied explanation. One night, as she was working late, she decided to investigate further. She accessed the device's core files, her heart racing as she scrolled through the data. What she found made her blood run cold. The device wasn't just predicting accidents, it was altering them. Lena's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. The device had the ability to manipulate time, changing events to prevent accidents from happening. But the implications were terrifying. If the device could alter time, what else could it do? And who was controlling it? Before she could process what she had discovered, the door to the lab opened. Lena quickly closed the files, her heart pounding as Victor walked in. "Working late?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Lena forced a smile. "Just trying to catch up on some data." Victor nodded, but his gaze lingered on her screen. "You've been doing excellent work, Lena. But remember, this project is highly confidential. If you have any questions, come to me directly." Lena nodded, her unease growing. "Of course, Victor." As he left the lab, Lena's mind raced. She had stumbled onto something far bigger than she had imagined. And now, she wasn't sure who she could trust. Lena couldn't sleep that night. The discovery she had made in the lab played over and over in her mind. The device wasn't just predicting accidents, it was manipulating time itself. The implications were staggering, and the more she thought about it, the more questions arose. Who had created this technology? And what were they using it for? The next morning, she arrived at Kane Industries early, determined to find answers. She avoided Victor, knowing he would sense her unease, and instead headed straight to the lab. Dr. Arjun was already there, hunched over a computer screen. "Good morning, Lena," he said without looking up. "You're here early." "Couldn't sleep," she replied, trying to sound casual. "Thought I'd get a head start on the data." Dr. Arjun nodded, still focused on his work. Lena sat down at her workstation, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She needed to know more, but she had to be careful. If Victor or anyone else suspected she was digging too deep, it could put her in danger. She spent the morning analyzing the data, looking for any clues that might explain the device's true purpose. As she worked, she noticed something strange, a series of encrypted files hidden deep within the system. They were labeled with dates, some from years ago, others from the future. Her curiosity got the better of her. She waited until Dr. Arjun left for a meeting, then began decrypting the files. It took hours, but finally, the first file opened. What she saw made her stomach churn. The file contained detailed records of events that had been altered using the device. But these weren't just accidents, they were major incidents, some of which had made headlines. A plane crash that had been miraculously averted. A stock market crash that had been prevented. Even political events that had been subtly influenced. And at the center of it all was Victor Kane. Lena's hands trembled as she scrolled through the files. Victor hadn't just been using the device to save lives, he had been using it to manipulate events for his own gain. The plane crash that had been averted? The airline was a competitor of one of his companies. The stock market crash? He had profited immensely from its prevention. The more she read, the more she realized the extent of his manipulation. Victor wasn't just a businessman, he was a puppet master, pulling the strings of the world from behind the scenes. Lena's mind raced. She had to do something, but what? If she went public with this information, who would believe her? And even if they did, Victor had the power to silence her before she could expose him. As she sat there, trying to figure out her next move, the door to the lab opened. Lena quickly closed the files, her heart pounding as Victor walked in. "Lena," he said, his tone calm but his eyes sharp. "I've been looking for you." She forced a smile, trying to hide her panic. "I was just finishing up some work." Victor studied her for a moment, his gaze piercing. "You've been spending a lot of time in the lab lately. Is everything okay?" Lena nodded, her throat dry. "Everything's fine. Just trying to keep up with the data." Victor stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You know, Lena, I brought you here because I saw something special in you. But trust is a two-way street. If there's something on your mind, I hope you'll come to me." Lena's heart raced. Was he testing her? Did he know what she had discovered? "Of course, Victor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll let you know if I find anything unusual." Victor nodded, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer before he turned to leave. "Good. I'll see you at the meeting this afternoon." As the door closed behind him, Lena let out a shaky breath. She was in over her head, and she knew it. But she couldn't back down now. She had to find a way to expose Victor's secrets, no matter the cost. Lena's mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination as she left the lab. She couldn't stay at Kane Industries any longer, not after what she had discovered. But she couldn't just walk away either. Victor was too powerful, too connected. If she tried to leave without a plan, he would find her. And if he suspected she knew the truth, he would stop at nothing to silence her. She needed evidence, solid, undeniable proof of Victor's manipulations. Only then could she expose him without risking her life. But gathering that evidence wouldn't be easy. The lab was heavily monitored, and Victor's paranoia meant he kept a close eye on everyone, especially her. That evening, as she sat in her small apartment, Lena began to formulate a plan. She would need help, someone she could trust completely. Her thoughts turned to her younger brother, Raj. He was smart, resourceful, and had always been her closest confidant. But involving him would put him in danger, and that was the last thing she wanted. Still, she had no other choice. "Raj," she said quietly, sitting down beside him at the kitchen table. "I need to tell you something. But you have to promise me you'll be careful." Raj looked up from his schoolbooks, his eyes wide with curiosity. "What's going on, Didi?" Lena took a deep breath, then began to explain everything: the device, the encrypted files, Victor's manipulations. Raj listened in stunned silence, his expression growing more serious with every word. "This is insane," he said when she finished. "But if what you're saying is true, we have to do something. We can't let him get away with this." Lena nodded, relieved that he believed her. "I need to get more evidence. But I can't do it alone. If I'm going to expose him, I'll need your help." Raj leaned forward, his voice low. "What do you need me to do?" Over the next hour, they worked out a plan. Raj would hack into Kane Industries' system from outside the building, using a secure connection to avoid detection. Meanwhile, Lena would gather as much data as she could from inside the lab, storing it on a portable drive. Once they had enough evidence, they would send it to the media and the authorities anonymously. It was risky, but it was their only chance. The next day, Lena returned to the lab, her nerves on edge. She worked as usual, careful not to draw attention to herself. But every time Victor walked by, her heart skipped a beat. She could feel his eyes on her, watching, waiting. That evening, as the lab emptied out, Lena stayed behind, pretending to work late. When she was sure no one was around, she began copying the encrypted files onto a small drive she had hidden in her bag. Her hands trembled as she worked, every second feeling like an eternity. Suddenly, the door to the lab opened. Lena froze, her heart pounding as Victor walked in. "Working late again?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Lena forced a smile, trying to hide her panic. "Just trying to catch up on some data." Victor stepped closer, his gaze lingering on her workstation. "You've been spending a lot of time here lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" Lena's mind raced. "No, of course not. I just want to make sure I'm doing a good job." Victor studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good. But remember, Lena, trust is important. If there's anything you need to share, I hope you'll come to me." "I will," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As Victor left the lab, Lena let out a shaky breath. She had to move quickly now. She finished copying the files, then slipped the drive into her bag and headed for the door. But as she stepped into the hallway, she saw Victor standing there, waiting. "Lena," he said, his voice cold. "We need to talk." Lena's heart raced as she faced Victor in the dimly lit hallway. His expression was calm, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes that made her blood run cold. She clutched her bag tightly, the portable drive inside feeling like a ticking time bomb. "Victor," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Is something wrong?" He took a step closer, his gaze piercing. "I think you know the answer to that, Lena. You've been acting strangely lately. And I can't help but wonder if there's something you're not telling me." Lena's mind raced. She had to think fast. "I've just been stressed," she said, trying to sound convincing. "The project is a lot to handle, and I want to make sure I'm doing a good job." Victor studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Lena, I brought you here because I saw potential in you. But trust is a two-way street. If you're hiding something from me, now is the time to come clean." Lena's stomach churned. She knew she couldn't keep up the charade much longer. But she also knew that if she confessed, Victor would never let her leave with the evidence. "I'm not hiding anything," she said, her voice firm. "But if you don't trust me, maybe I shouldn't be working here." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Is that what you want? To walk away from all of this?" Lena hesitated. She had to play this carefully. "I just think, maybe this isn't the right place for me." Victor stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "Lena, you don't understand what's at stake here. This project is bigger than you, bigger than me. If you try to leave, there will be consequences." Lena's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "I'm not afraid of you, Victor." For a moment, they stared at each other, the tension thick in the air. Then Victor's expression softened, and he let out a sigh. "I don't want to hurt you, Lena," he said, his tone almost pleading. "But I can't let you jeopardize everything I've built. If you just give me the drive and walk away, I'll let you go. No questions asked." Lena's breath caught in her throat. He knew. Somehow, he knew about the drive. She took a step back, her mind racing. She had to get out of there, now. Without warning, she turned and bolted down the hallway, her bag clutched tightly to her chest. Behind her, she heard Victor shout, but she didn't look back. She ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding in her ears. The building was a maze, but Lena knew the way to the emergency exit. She burst through the door and into the cool night air, her lungs burning as she sprinted toward the street. But Victor wasn't giving up that easily. She heard his footsteps behind her, closing in fast. She glanced over her shoulder and saw him gaining on her, his face twisted with anger. Desperate, Lena darted into an alley, hoping to lose him in the shadows. But the alley was a dead end. She turned, her back against the wall, as Victor stepped into the narrow space, blocking her escape. "Lena," he said, his voice calm but menacing. "This doesn't have to end badly. Just give me the drive, and we can forget this ever happened." Lena's mind raced. She had to think fast. She reached into her bag and pulled out the drive, holding it up for him to see. "Is this what you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. Victor nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "That's it. Just hand it over, and we can both walk away." Lena hesitated, then threw the drive as hard as she could. It sailed over Victor's head and landed in a pile of trash at the other end of the alley. Victor's smile faded, and his eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't have done that." He lunged at her, but Lena was ready. She ducked under his arm and darted past him, running back toward the street. But before she could reach the end of the alley, Victor grabbed her arm, pulling her back. They struggled, Victor's grip like iron as he tried to wrestle the bag from her. Lena fought with everything she had, kicking and clawing to break free. In the chaos, her hand brushed against something in her bag, a small can of pepper spray she always carried for protection. She grabbed it and sprayed it directly into Victor's face. He let out a cry of pain, releasing her as he stumbled back, clutching his eyes. Lena didn't waste a second. She turned and ran, her heart pounding as she disappeared into the night. Lena didn't stop running until she reached a crowded street, her lungs burning and her legs trembling. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting Victor to be right behind her, but the alley was empty. For now, she was safe. She ducked into a nearby cafe, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. Raj answered on the first ring. "Didi, where are you? Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. "I'm fine," Lena said, trying to catch her breath. "But I need your help. I have the evidence, but Victor knows. He's not going to let me go that easily." Raj's voice was firm. "Tell me where you are. I'll come get you." Lena gave him the location of the cafe, then hung up and slumped into a chair. Her mind raced as she waited, replaying the confrontation with Victor. She had the evidence, but now she had to figure out what to do with it. When Raj arrived, he looked pale but determined. "We need to get this evidence to the authorities," he said, sitting down across from her. "But we have to be careful. If Victor has as much power as you say, he might have people everywhere." Lena nodded, her mind racing. "We'll send it anonymously. That way, he won't know it's us." They spent the next few hours compiling the data and crafting a detailed report. Lena explained everything she had discovered, the device's ability to manipulate time, Victor's use of it for personal gain, and the potential dangers if the technology fell into the wrong hands. Once they were finished, they uploaded the files to a secure server and sent them to several major news outlets, as well as government agencies. Lena held her breath as she hit send, praying that someone would take it seriously. The next few days were a blur. Lena and Raj stayed hidden, moving from place to place to avoid detection. They watched the news anxiously, waiting for the story to break. Finally, it happened. The headline was impossible to miss: tech mogul Victor Kane accused of time manipulation scandal. The story spread like wildfire, with reporters digging into Victor's past and uncovering more evidence of his manipulations. Lena and Raj watched from a small motel room as Victor's empire began to crumble. His companies were investigated, his assets frozen, and his reputation destroyed. Within weeks, he was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and illegal use of advanced technology. As the dust settled, Lena felt a mix of relief and sadness. She had stopped Victor, but the cost had been high. She had lost her job, her home, and any sense of normalcy. But she had also gained something invaluable, the knowledge that she had done the right thing, no matter how difficult it had been. One evening, as she and Raj sat on the motel balcony, watching the sunset, Raj turned to her. "What now, Didi?" Lena smiled, a sense of peace settling over her. "Now, we start over. We've been through so much, but we're still here. And as long as we have each other, we'll be okay." Raj nodded, his eyes filled with admiration. "You're amazing, Didi. You saved so many people by standing up to Victor. I'm proud of you." Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "I couldn't have done it without you, Raj. You're my strength." As they sat there, watching the sky turn from orange to deep blue, Lena realized that the true lesson of her journey wasn't about power or technology. It was about the importance of kindness, courage, and standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Victor's downfall had shown her that even the most powerful people could be brought down by the truth. And her own strength had shown her that even the smallest acts of bravery could change the world.